My name is Florence Hardy. I am an attorney and a business consultant. I've been an attorney for almost 10 years. My practice primarily consists of helping individuals in their corporate matters. So I help people do their entity formations, trademark or copyright registrations, contracts, and the like. Through my firm and other lawyers in the firm, we're also able to do estate planning and family law. However, my practice focuses solely on businesses. I've been in the cannabis space for about 3 years. I got into cannabis because I am also owner of True Crowd Illinois, which is a crowdfunding website which helps businesses raise in Illinois raise money from Illinois residents. That business is converting to solely help cannabis companies in Illinois raise money from Illinois residents. So you should be looking out for that. I'm happy to answer any questions about crowdfunding if you don't know what that is. But that's how I got into this space. But if you have any questions, they're both now and after the presentation, you can always email me. It's just florence@florencehardylaw.com. But let's get to the good stuff. As Leslie stated, the 10 things to know about the cannabis industry, specifically in Illinois. One thing I will note that is not one of the 10 things is that cannabis law is state specific. So something that is compliant or legal in the state of Illinois may be illegal in a different state and vice versa. Something that's legal in Michigan may not be legal in Illinois. So you need to be very specific. Just because you've seen something someplace else doesn't mean that you're able to do it in this state. So number one is that education is your responsibility. That means educating your consumers is your responsibility. You cannot give this task or rely on the public or other organizations or the government to educate your consumers on cannabis. You have to be responsible for doing it yourself. And so, what that means is if you need to host classes, if you need to have more direct labeling practices, if you need to have one-on-one sales meetings, and that's the only way that you can get your product to the consumer, that's what you need to do. Primarily, this has been put into place to ensure consumers know what they're ingesting. All cannabis is not equal. THC levels differ, potency differs, and so it's up to you to ensure that your clients and your consumers are purchasing what they intend to purchase and that they know how to use what they purchase. I know for some products you can only eat so much, period. Other things you have to wait 48 hours depending on the potency, and that's not always obvious, especially if it's an edible or a topical product. So you need to make sure that whatever your packaging is, your labeling is, your education process is, that you have something in place. A lot of businesses are including training videos or instructional videos on their website. They're enlisting the help of their salespeople. So if it is in a dispensary, they're making sure that all the dispensary agents know everything about every product so they know what to recommend should a customer come in and have questions. But it's your responsibility. You can't give it to another party. Now, this is true even if you don't own the dispensary. If you just have a product that's in the dispensary, you need to make sure that this education happens. So again, all of those mediums that I talked about are options for you, whether or not you have a dispensary, even if you're just someone who has a product that goes in a dispensary. So be mindful of that. The other thing to note about this education piece is that if you are applying for a plant touching operation, and we'll talk about all the different licenses that are available in the next point, but if one of your if you're applying for a license that is plant touching, meaning you're touching the cannabis product itself, as a part of your application for that license, you're going to have a plan for this education. So you can't just say, yes, I plan to have videos. You're going to have to be more in depth with your answer as to how this education will be delivered, how often it'll be delivered, who's going to deliver it, and so forth. So this is a really big point. I have had some clients who are going to hire third parties to manage their education, and that's their plan. But you still need a plan for in your organization how it will be handled. So number two is speaks to the types of plant touching operations that exist. So you can do more than a dispensary. I know that's the operation that we see on the streets, as it were, but there are actually 5 different types of licenses that you can apply for in the state of Illinois in the cannabis industry. So, of course, the first is dispensary. The second is a cultivation center. The third is infusers. The fourth is transportation. And then the fifth is craft grow. So we all know what dispensaries are, right? That's the consumer facing product. So that is where, and it is the only place where consumers can actually go in and buy the product. If you have any of these other types of licenses, you cannot sell directly to the public. You have to sell to a dispensary, and that dispensary is the only authorized organization or business that can sell to the public right now. So that's very important to note. Even if you are growing the plant or you're creating a topical or an edible that has cannabis with the high levels of THC, in the state of Illinois is 0.03 percentage of THC in it, then you cannot sell directly to the public. You can only sell through a dispensary. So that's the consumer facing operation. Cultivation centers are grow operations, so where they're growing the plant for distribution, but they're growing in up to 14,000 square feet. So these are large greenhouses um, that are cultivation centers. Infusers are businesses that put cannabis in topical or edible product. So they infuse it into some good, and then that ultimate product is what's sold to a dispensary at wholesale and then sold to the public at resale. Transportation companies include businesses that transport cannabis products from business to business. Transporters at this point are not allowed to transport to consumers. So there's no such thing in Illinois as a cannabis delivery company where you pick up from a dispensary and then deliver it to a consumer. That's illegal in this state. It's legal in other states, but not in Illinois. That is expected to change, but who knows when or how much it'll be to add that activity on. So a lot of people who are banking on this particular license are hoping that it opens up to be able to deliver to the consumer. But right now, transportation is uh, transporting cannabis from one business to another. So this might be you're transporting from a craft grow to a dispensary, or from a craft grow to an infuser, or to an infuser to a dispensary. That's the transportation that that license covers. And then lastly, those there are craft grow. Craft growers are people who grow, so the same as cultivation centers, but they're limited to grow in 5,000 square feet or less. So craft grow is really for smaller operations. The license application fee is lower than for cultivation centers, as well as the application or registration uh, for the license itself is lower than cultivation centers. So if you're interested in growing the plant for distribution, but you are a smaller operator, then you would go with craft grow as opposed to a cultivation center. The 2020 licenses were supposed to be issued last year, but they were not. We're not quite sure when that second wave of applications will open and when those licenses will be issued. There's been no update, as well as no update on when an update will be provided. So we're still waiting. But when that second wave does come out, there will be new licenses for 110 dispensaries, 60 craft growers, and 60 infuser licenses. That's for the entire state. The last thing that I'll note about the different license types is that transporters are the only license that are not capped at a max number. So we'll talk about that next, which is all of the licenses are limited by law. So dispensaries, once it's all said and done, there'll be 500 max in Illinois. Now that may change at some point, but as the law reads right now, there's only 500 dispensaries going to be licensed in Illinois. There are going to be 30 cultivation centers, 100 infuser licenses, 150 craft grow licenses. And as I alluded to, transportation is the only one that's unlimited. So with these licenses, the top four, which are capped at a certain number, those applications are rated. So they get a grade number, and then the top respondents are the ones who get the license. What we saw in this first round and why it is taking so long to issue these licenses is that they did that. They issued it to the top respondents, um, but they were all like almost the same company. So out of the 75 licenses that that were supposed to be or that were approved, they weren't issued. The 75 licenses that were approved, it was among like 30 different companies when there were 900 applications. So that process didn't necessarily work out fairly. And there's a lawsuit right now to figure out if there's some other kind of way to distribute these limited number of licenses. But for transportation, in order to get that license, you just need to meet the minimum score requirements, which is like 80% of the max score. So if you are interested in transport, all you need to do is get 80% of the max score as far as points are concerned, and you will be awarded a license. It's not going to be just the top 5 or the top 70 or whatever. What that means is that transportation will be highly competitive, um, but it's a license that most people who've never worked in the industry are more likely to get just because of the point system. There's no lottery or anything like that, as is the case with the other licenses. So number 4 is, there's 5 different types of applications, and the applications are long, but the law gives you the answer. And so I want to be clear that the application itself, you can print it out online. It's about 12 to 15 pages, depending upon which license you are applying for. However, your response to that application will be between 150 and 200 pages. So it's a very long, drawn out, difficult process. The state wants detail after detail after detail in your application. And um, I've always erred on the side of providing, as with this process, providing more information than was requested in order to ensure that you give the state the information they're looking for. Now, they do tell you what they're looking for. The law for the cannabis program is itself 150 pages. It's a lot to go through. But for each license, there's dedicated about 20 pages that specifically talks about what the application process needs to include in order to make it a successful applicant. And so the answer is there. You just need to weed through it. But in the end, I would say most individuals who are thinking of starting a business in this space, they spend about 2 to 4 months on the application itself. The application, although the period is closed and they're not accepting them quite yet, the applications for all of these licenses are available online to view and print out and start working on. So you don't have to wait until the application period opens. You can start right now to gather the information, to start the research, to build the team, whatever it is you need to do to put forth a successful application. But it is a long, drawn out process. There is no shortcut to getting these applications completed. And as you start to work through your applications, the thing that most people skip over, but it's really important, is the definitions, because most people assume they know what words mean, like reside or disproportionately impacted area in this case. You might think, oh, well, if I'm on the south side of Chicago, I'm in a disproportionately impacted area. But that's not exactly true. And reside doesn't necessarily mean just to live in Chicago or in Illinois, for that matter. So you want to make sure that as you look at your application, that you're not passing up some key words that definition may differ from what is generally believed it should be, specifically around eligibility. So in order to be eligible for a license, and this goes to one of the key definitions, you have to reside, or 51% of the ownership has to reside in Illinois. Where reside doesn't just mean live here, but in fact, it means lived here for at least 2 years. So if you just moved here, you may in fact reside in Illinois, but according to the law, you're not a resident eligible to apply for the license. So it's very key that you look at some of those key definitions. Another one that I highlighted earlier is disproportionately impacted area. If you are in a disproportionately impacted area, there are benefits in the form of fee reduction, as well as additional points given on your application when you apply. However, you need to make sure that you're in that area. And the state has a map on its website that you can put in an address to determine if, in fact, you reside or plan to work in a disproportionately impacted area. So that's a very key definition. And you want to make sure that if you can partake in those benefits, that you are, in fact, doing so by looking at that map. The third thing, a definition that is very key and can still lead to some of those benefits as far as fee reduction or additional points in your application, is social equity applicant. And you may think that social equity applicant just means, oh, well, a minority or something like that. But actually, social equity has no, it doesn't talk about minority status or race at all. To be a social equity applicant, you qualify in one of three ways. One is you either work in a disproportionately impacted area, that means you plan to start the business in that area by the map. So make sure you look at that map. The third is that you live in a disproportionately impacted area. And the second is that you live in a disproportionately impacted area. And then the third is that someone in your immediate family has a charge on their record that can be expunged based on the new cannabis law. And your immediate family is something that also has a definition to it. So it's like your mother, father, brother, sister, son, not your aunt or your cousin. So those are very important definitions to look at, and they could lead to some significant benefits to your application. The next thing to note is that money is available through the Cannabis Business Development Fund. So I haven't talked about money at all, like how much the application fee costs, how much the license costs if you're awarded it. However, the first question that I generally get is that I need money, how do I find money? So if you are awarded a license, there is money available. At this point, there is not money available for simply applying for the license. And applying for the license itself can be anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000, depending upon if you enlist the services of accountants or attorneys to help you complete your application. And that's all money that you have to pay up front. But if you are awarded a license, then you have the opportunity to then apply for these other funds that are available. At the time that I created this application, it was about 12 million in the fund for businesses who are awarded a license. And this fund is built by the fees and taxes that current dispensaries are required to pay. So right now, this fund has to 18 million in it. Because one, the money hasn't been distributed because none of the people or none of the additional dispensaries or those other licenses that I talked about none of those licenses have been issued. So the money is just sitting there waiting for these additional licenses to be issued, and millions keep adding to it every month based on the fees and taxes that current operators have to pay. However, you will still have to apply for this funding, and it will be a competitive process. To start that process, however, you can do it right now. You can sign up through the state's GATA program, which is the State of Illinois' Grant and Accountability and Transparency Act. And you can sign up or start that process such that if you are awarded a license, you're already in the system and you don't have to start the process then. Um, so if you are looking for something that you can do right now, you can sign up for this program. The good thing, and good is relative, but the good thing about signing up for the state's GATA program now is that that doesn't, it allows you to be eligible for all state funding that if that program is applicable to you. So it's not just that you would sign up for this if you want this cannabis business money. um, it's any state money that is being offered through a program or organization. You would have to sign up through this GATA program. So it does make sense to just do it anyway because you never know what opportunities might arise, but it's specifically required if you are going to apply for money through the Cannabis Business Development Fund um, for your cannabis operation. The other thing that I'll say is that with the GATA program, it takes about 2 weeks to sign up. It's not just going to the state of Illinois' website, putting in your email address, and being done. You have to do some things at the state level. You have to turn in some documents at the federal level, and so forth. And so the entire process can take about 2 weeks. So it does make sense to start it as soon as possible and just get it out the way. You do have to renew it annually, but there's no fee to apply or renew. So that is the good thing. With number 7, all licenses are conditional. And so what that means is that simply being awarded a license and issued a license doesn't give you the right to maintain it. The state can revoke it at any time if you're non-compliant, or you can be subject to non-renewal. And there are multiple grounds under which they can revoke your license. So you have to remember that, the fight is not over once you're awarded one of these licenses. If you're awarded one of these licenses, the state can take it away. Now, generally, revocation is not going to be the first step. You have to do something pretty egregious for the first warning to be or to result in a revocation of your license or the non-renewal of your license. But that said, remember those top 4 licenses are capped at certain numbers. So should a license be revoked, that leaves a space for someone else to apply, and that's where you'll get later opportunities to apply for some of these licenses as they become revoked. Last week, and this is in a different state, but Missouri, they revoked 27 licenses for people who had them issued were operating businesses. So it is possible that these licenses will be revoked if the business owner isn't running their business in the way in which they should. So just be mindful of that. They're at all times conditional. There's no way to get a guaranteed license. So what talked about educating your consumers, you're also responsible for training your agents. Those are the people who work for you or who own the company. So agents include just not only officers, but board members, employees, anyone with over, I believe it's 10% ownership in the company would need to be trained as an agent. And this is a formal training. This is not an in-house training or product training that you might provide in addition to the training that's required by the state. The training required by the state is called responsible vendor training. You can find responsible vendor programs all over the state. Organizations, third-party organizations have them all the time. You can look for their schedules online as well. And there are some larger cannabis operations that have certified or responsible training programs in-house. So it is possible to do it in-house, but for the most part, you're going to go to a third party to get this responsible vendor training that you require. And this is for anyone who works in a cannabis business. So it's not just dispensaries. It is cultivation centers, transporters, infusers, craft grow, and dispensaries. So all of those businesses, if it is a plant touching operation, will need to ensure that all employees, officers, and board members have this responsible vendor training. In addition to that, those who successfully complete the responsible vendor training will get what's called an agent card. That agent card is going to be specific to the vertical in which they're in. So if they're in dispensaries, they'll get a dispensary agent card. If you're in transportation, you'll get a transportation agent card. And individuals who have these cards must have them on their person at all times when they are working in or for the business. So for transporters, you might have drivers. Those drivers will need to have it on them at all times. For dispensaries, all your on-site employees will have to have it on them at all times. If someone loses their agent card, there's a process in which you have to contact the state to let them know that it's lost and to get a new one. So there's all these important things. This training and this agent card is not something to be taken lightly. And just like education for your consumers has to be in your application for a license, so does the education for how you're or that you're going to provide your officers, employees, or board members. That plan also has to be a part of your cannabis business application. Number 9 is you have to be financially responsible. Now, this really means you just have to have money for more than just the license. I can bring up to you the actual license cost, but the application fees for all of these licenses are $5,000. And if you don't get the license, you don't get your money back. But beyond that, in order to have a successful application, you need to be able to show that you can not only pay for the license itself, but all of the operations of the business that the license requires. So for dispensaries specifically, you're going to need to have $50,000 sitting in a bank account at all times with the state or an escrow. It might not be a bank account for for the issues that cannabis companies have in opening bank accounts. But you're going to have $50,000 in escrow, and you are on this account as well as the state of Illinois. So the way that this escrow account will work is whenever you have fees or taxes that need to be paid, the state is just going to go in this account and take their money, and then it's up to you to make sure that it's at $50,000 or more at all times. So this is the state's way of making sure that they always have their money or a way to get their money. They're not waiting for you to write them a check for what's owed. They're always going to have access to this money in this escrow. And so other license types don't have this requirement. So if you're an infuser, you don't have a escrow account that the um, state can put its hands in at any time, but you still need to show that you have the money to effectively and compliantly operate an infuser operation. So you have to be financially responsible, and that means that your financials need to be top notch in your application. Now, they may be wrong, right? Because we can't see into the future. We don't have a glass ball, but it needs to show that you've done your due diligence. You have a good sense of what the financial needs of your business will be, and you have a plan for providing for those financial requirements. And then number 10 is this act is called the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. Tax is in the name. The only reason that cannabis is legal in the state of Illinois is because the state wants to collect taxes. They're not interested in healing people. They're not interested in people having fun. They just want to be able to collect these taxes. And so there are lots of taxes that every type of business in this industry is going to be subject to. The two most prevalent taxes are the cultivation privilege tax. This is for cultivators as well as craft grow. They will have a tax of 7% to the dispensary or to whomever they sell to. So they might sell to a dispensary, they might sell to an infuser, and they're going to put this 7% tax on it. In the end, the infuser or the dispensary can pass that tax on to the consumer, but that cultivation center or craft grower will be responsible for collecting that 7% tax. And then the cannabis purchase excise tax is going to be an additional 10 to 25% tax on that product. So if, let's say, for example, 7% is a hard number to work with, but let's say that a product is $10 at the cultivation center, then that means that once it gets sold to an infuser, it's going to be $10.70. The infuser is going to do what it is. Let's say then that brings the price up to $20. And then once it's sold to a retailer, that um, the retailer doesn't pay the tax on it. It's the consumer that pays the tax on it. So then on the shelf, it might be $20 or $22.50 because it's subject to that 25% tax. That math might be wrong, but let's assume it's right. So you got from a $10 product all the way up to a $22, $23, $25 product because of the taxes that are now involved in that. And the state wants its money. So these taxes have to be paid on a weekly basis, which means that all businesses will be prepaying taxes. The state wants you to assume how much you're going to sell every week and then prepay those taxes. At the end of the month, you're going to file a return to determine if you pay the right amount of taxes or if you pay too little in taxes. And if you pay too little in taxes, you'll have a certain amount of time to make that up before you're fined. If you pay too much in taxes, they're just going to keep it as a credit for the next time. So this is a very accounting heavy industry, right? Because they just want the taxes. And if you fail to pay your taxes timely or you underpay taxes too many times, you can be charged with a felony. So it's very important that as you think about entering this industry, that you have someone on your team who understands these taxes, has the ability to ensure that they're paid on time, and that all of the accounting is done appropriately. Because that is a big, heavy penalty should you be found to not have paid your taxes timely or correctly. Now, one of the things that I'll talk about too is that there are some of these bonus notes, right? So I wanted to provide you with some additional information about the cannabis that comes out that's beyond the top 10 things to know. The first sort of bonus is that there are community college cannabis programs. The community college programs typically revolve around the plant itself, how to grow, what are the different variants, what's a good environment, how to buy tools, how to get the seed, etc. So it's more about the plant and less about running the business of a dispensary or an infuser and so forth. That said, they're still beneficial if you don't have that much background into the plant itself. I recommend you take those community college programs, and it's up to the community college whether or not they're paid or free programs. But some of the colleges offering programs are Oakton Community College as well as Olive Harvey Community College, but they're all over the state. And the state of Illinois' website has a list of college programs where cannabis is being taught. The next thing is that background checks are required for anyone with more than 5% ownership. This background check is to make sure that there are no financial crimes, as well as no certain felonies are excluded from ownership or participation in this industry as well. So you will have to undergo a background check if you have ownership of more than 5%. There's also background checks for employees as well, but it's a different kind of background check. But that said, you can go through the background check system now, even before you've applied for the license, and just add your results to that check to your license application. If you are found to be in non-compliance for any reason, it can be a big deal. So I mentioned that revocation is likely not going to be the first penalty, but fines start at $10,000. There is not a fine less than $10,000 in this act. So if it is found that you are in non-compliance, the minimum fine per infraction will be $10,000. The max fine is $50,000. So you don't want to be non-compliant at all because you're going to get hit with a bill of not less than $10,000. So that is very important to know. You also don't need to have a location to get approved for a license. Now, that said, this is a very competitive process, right? 900 applications for 75 spaces is what happened in 2020. So if you don't have a location, you're likely not going to be in that top, tier of applicants. But that said, let's say you have a location, and because of the time it takes To get the license, you lose it, right? You don't sign the lease and the landlord leases it out. The deal falls through, whatever. So if you are awarded a license, but you lose your location or don't have one, you have 3 to 6 months to find a new location once a license has been awarded to you. Now, you won't be issued the license until you have the location, the business has been inspected, and so forth, but you will be awarded a license, which means you can move forward knowing that a license is pending. And then lastly, the Women's Business Development Center offers responsible agent training or responsible vendor training. That's one of the organizations that I do consulting for. If you're looking for other organizations that provide this training, again, that list is provided on the state of Illinois' website, and I'm happy to provide those direct links should you need it. Now, this is, I wanted to provide some additional information. If you've decided that you do want to start a cannabis business, I provide assistance to help people through the application as well as through business setup through 2 different programs. I can give you more information about these 2 programs should you be interested. But each one is, or the Cannabis Business in a Box is a 1-day program, and then the license assistance is a 2-day program. So that's me. That's who I am. One thing that I do want to mention that gets overlooked a lot for people who are interested in starting a cannabis business is there's a lot of emphasis placed on plant touching operations. So those 5 licenses that I talked about earlier. However, this is an industry just like any other industry. So there's a full supply chain in the cannabis space where you can enter into the industry and not be plant touching. So things like packaging or marketing or legal in my case, right? So I never have to touch a plant in my life, but I'm still in the cannabis industry. There are tons of ways for you to enter the cannabis supply chain using the skills that you already have. If you don't want to run a plant touching operation or go through these very long application processes, and I'm happy to discuss with you what those options might be should you find that applying for a license isn't for you. With that said, thank you for allowing me to share some information about starting a cannabis business in Illinois. And I am happy to take any questions if they exist at this time.